Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
John retired as CEO of RBC Global Asset Management in 2015, at which point the company managed $370 billion in assets, placing it among the 50 largest asset managers worldwide. John currently serves as Director and Audit Chair of the following organizations: Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, AbCellera Incorporated, which is listed on the NASDAQ, and Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals, which is listed on the TSX. John's many past volunteer roles have included chair of the UBC Board of Governors, chair of the Vancouver Police Foundation, Killam trustee, co-founder of Take a Hike Youth at Risk Foundation, and chair of the Vancouver Public Library Capital Campaign. He now supports our communities as a director of the Gardner Foundation, the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, the Rideau Hall Foundation, and Windmill Microlending, and is the current chair of St. Paul's Hospital Foundation. In this podcast episode, we discuss how to be an impactful mentor. John, can you describe a mentor that has had a particularly significant impact on you?
Scott, thank you for having me here today, and hi, everyone. Mentorship has had a profound impact on my life, and I have to say I was really fortunate in that I've had three or four key mentors from the age of 14 right through to where I am today in my late 50s. My first mentor was my soccer coach, believe it or not, at 14. I grew up in East Vancouver, which is a working class area of the city, primarily all immigrants. And most of the immigrant parents were uneducated, or if they were educated, they were not working in the jobs that they were qualified for, much like we're hearing about some of the key issues today with respect to immigration. And so my soccer team in East Vancouver merged with the soccer team on the west side of Vancouver, where it was all professional class. So the parents of the players were lawyers, doctors, engineers. And you can imagine these two teams coming together. And the reason why we came together is we couldn't defeat another team in Delta. And so the only way to get out of Vancouver and play in the Nationals was to merge our two teams. So you had this clash of personalities, working class kids and non-working class kids. And the coach was a corporate lawyer by the name of Mike Dumoulin. And Mike, believe it or not, was the very first professional I came in contact with outside of my own teachers. And Mike, Mr. Doom, as we called him, he spent a lot of time trying to understand the kids from the east side, because it was his first exposure to kids from a working class neighborhood. We literally had 7 kids from East Van, 7 kids from the west side. And it was a beautiful combination of kids at the time and economic backgrounds. And Mr. Doom spent a lot of time mentoring every single kid from a very different perspective, not only as a coach, but just as a human being. And what he taught me at the age of 14 and became my mentor all the way through to the time I was 19 and graduating from high school and going into university was that it didn't matter where you came from. It's what you had upstairs and what you had in your heart. And he encouraged me and so many of the other kids to not fall into a trade and think that that was your destiny, that your destiny is so much more. And, there's help if you need it to get to where you want to be, follow your dreams kind of thing. And Mike had such an inspiration on me that I indeed decided that, I'm not going to have a low bar for myself. I'm going to make it really high. I want to be a Mr. Doom. and so I pursued university. I was one of 4 or 5 kids from my graduating class of almost 400 in 1983 to go to university. And one of the other 4 was also on that same soccer team. And so the two of us went to university. I graduated in finance, and he graduated as a CPA eventually. So Mike had a remarkable impact on us, and it showed that someone who's not you from the other side of the tracks can believe in you. And then in my 20s and early 30s, I had the CEO of my firm that I worked for, Dick Bradshaw from Phillips Hager North. He was a remarkable mentor and remains a mentor to in my life to this day, well over 30 years. And Dick taught me to be a professional, an empathetic leader, and how to become a community leader, not just a corporate leader. Dick, as a mentor, would be quite hard on me because we were working side by side each day because he raised the bar on me professionally. He thought my potential was far greater than what I was showing. And he would go out of his way to first and foremost show by example what a remarkable leader looked like. And secondarily, encouraged me and challenged me to be a better professional, a better person, and a better community leader. And I tried to meet those challenges because I couldn't believe such a successful individual, the CEO of our firm, was taking so much interest and putting in so much energy into me that I felt I owed it to him and all those around me that he wasn't mentoring, that I'd be the best I can be. And here I am in my 50s and thinking that there's not much more to learn. Of course, there's a lot to learn, and 50s is the new 40s, as we say, but that's self-interested. But I have two other mentors today in my life. One would be a former bank chair who is a remarkable leader. She's more of a person I wish to emulate rather than call a mentor. But I look at someone who's so remarkably successful, and I see, despite the demands on her time, the pressures to be perfect, always positive energy, selflessness in the face of success, and the demands that go with it. And she can give advice and not be demeaning or disrespectful in spite of her position in the community. And lastly, the current the current chair of the Canada Pension Plan, Heather Monroe Bloom, is a remarkable board chair. And this stage in my life where I'm chairing a lot of boards, both professional, publicly traded companies, but a lot of private startups as well, quite a number of them, and community boards. And I look at Heather and see how she spends countless hours trying to find the diamond in my rough when it comes to my personal style, how I chair meetings, how I conduct myself at board meetings, and she spends countless hours walking through with me how to be a better board member, how to be a better advisor, and leader at the highest levels of corporate governance. So, long answer to a short question, but I guess you can see that I've been very fortunate by having a number of mentors throughout my life's journey, and I don't think it's necessarily unusual, but I do realize how fortunate that is, Scott.
I love that you provided examples of different mentors from when you were like a teenager until today. This is spanning 3.5 decades, and it's such a testament to the fact that everyone, regardless of one's age, can benefit from mentorship in some kind of way. I'm thinking of there's a supporter of Venture for Canada who's now in his late 60s, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and he was telling me about his regular conversations that he has with his mentor, who's now around 90, and they still have these regular conversations.
Well, I'm 58, and I still think of myself as being young. Like I do a lot of water sports. I played a lot of soccer in my life, and I'm really quite active. I ski. I do things that I never thought a 50-year-old would do when I was 18 to 30, somewhere in there. And yet, my mentors to this day are equally active, and they're in their 70s, and Dick Bradshaw's in his 80s, and they still have a lot to say that matters because no one knows me better than them, and it's really important to get a tune-up every once in a while, regardless of your age. That doesn't come from your kids or your spouse. So I think it's really important that mentors remain active in your lives, so long as those relationships remain fruitful for both of you.
Going back to Mike, the mentor you had when you were a teenager, can you think of a specific moment when Mike mentored you or gave you advice in some kind of way that had a significant impact on your life?
Yeah, I remember one moment in particular. We were about 17 years old, and we're getting close to graduation. from high school, and a bunch of kids showed up to the game hungover, and they were obviously partying the night before. And just as a reminder from my opening remarks, this soccer team was one of the best teams in Canada that we were on. We were playing at that level, and we had some big qualifying games ahead of us, and a bunch of kids showed up hungover. One didn't even make it, and Mike was distraught. He had poured so much into this team. He tried to professionalize it. He was not a naturally gifted soccer player himself. He learned how to coach soccer from books, and 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 I and I remember him sort of sitting me down before the game, telling me how disappointed he was. He actually connected with me at a very personal level, and he said, John, I learned how to coach from a book. This team 5 years ago didn't have a coach. There was no volunteers. I didn't have a son in the game. I just wanted kids to be healthy and give themselves a chance. And he was becoming a bit vulnerable, and I didn't know at that time quite where he was coming from, but it was coming from a place of deep emotion for him. And he just said to me, like, you know what? You've got the world ahead of you. Don't make bad choices. Continue to make good choices. And I remember just taking the bus home after that game and just trying to figure out, like, what was he trying to tell me? And there were so many messages in that little conversation he had with me, where he was expressing disappointment in some kids that he had given so much to, but at the same time he was trying to ignite some hope in me that I can be different. And it had a profound impact on me. It was really a game changer for me, if you pardon the metaphor.
When you think to that specific moment and Mike opened up to you and was vulnerable and kind of shared that his insights with you, how did it feel? Like how did it feel to you in that moment?
Truthfully, I was young, so it just felt weird. I'm just like, what's up with this guy? He's getting a bit emotional on me, and but I also remember feeling that my teammates let me down too. Like I always was hopeful of being a professional soccer player, and I would say I got relatively close. I wasn't that close, but close enough to have a dream. And I was just thinking, like, why is he telling me this? He could have just gotten angry at the start and just said, "Okay, teammates have let you down, boys. Let's just go out and do the best we can." Instead, he remained pretty quietly disappointed amongst the group, but for some reason had a split off conversation with me. It lasted, all of 45 seconds. But it was probably amongst the most important 45 seconds of my life in terms of self-reflection, thinking about how you're not going to let someone down, how someone is believing in you, and how to succeed, you actually had to be different in some of the choices you made. So the result was I never had as much fun in college as I should have because I had this thing hanging over my head pretty much all through my college years about don't make bad choices. And having said that, it at the end of the day, it served me really, really well because I made some really good choices through university. They were less fun, but they were really good choices. I attribute it all back to Mike, and I just can't underscore how important that conversation was.
What were some of those really good choices that you made in university?
Uh, it all, Scott, it was all about partying, right? And how much time do you spend hanging out with friends and just having too good a time versus making sure your marks were where they should be. And it's interesting. Another mentor I had during university was Milton Wong. Milt Wong is a legend in Vancouver, not only as a business leader but as a philanthropist. Sadly he's no longer with us. And in fact, if this was on video, over my left shoulder, there's a book that was written about Milt, and I have it prominently displayed in my office, just as a reminder to me every day of my duty to society. And Milt was really instrumental in me making good choices in university. He became a mentor of mine through happenstance as I was going through business school, and Milt was sponsoring a program called the Portfolio Management Foundation, where six kids in finance got chosen to manage a couple million dollars, real money, and we had to report to people downtown. And we worked in Ontario and in New York in the summer jobs. And Milt would always remind us, because we needed reminding as naive kids, how this was a once in a lifetime opportunity. So sometimes, not going away for weekends and preparing for your Monday meeting, or, not partying too hard on Thursday because you had something ready for Friday, that given the stream that he's just put you through, this is normally reserved for kids in Ivy Leagues. And me and many of the others in the program didn't come from privileged backgrounds. So maybe we should recognize the opportunity that's before us, and make sacrifices that others would not sacrifice because they just weren't given the same opportunity. So the choices were all about time management ultimately, and reputational management, and healthy lifestyle decisions, and also being willing to be mentored to grow up perhaps a little faster than those around you because of the opportunity bestowed upon you. So, Mr. Doom was always sort of hanging over me like an angel on my shoulder, and then Milt Wong came flying in through the university years to really shepherd myself and about 5, 6 others into the business world. And again, how lucky am I to have these people fall into my lap? Milt also came from a working class family, raised in Chinatown here in Vancouver under immense poverty, and became a community leader and philanthropist in his later years, and revered by every single Vancouverite. And here, this young kid from East Van has him fall into your lap and mentoring you. It was, again, something you felt obliged to step up to, and not let them down. So a lot of pressure for a young kid being mentored. There's a lot of pressure when you're being mentored, Scott. You have these people who are putting a lot of expectations on you because they see your potential. And it's interesting. Some people recognize it, and those around me recognize that we were under a bit of pressure here to succeed, and others were naive to it. And so we were just fortunate that, again, we were trying to make good decisions as we were coming into contact with these remarkable individuals in our community.
How did you deal with that kind of pressure? I can imagine that would have been a lot to deal with, especially kind of in the context of the fact you were very young at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. The concept of mentoring is an interesting one, right? Because they could be conversations, but in some mentorship, there's a level of expectations that can be built as well. And I reflect on this a lot when I'm mentoring. As I mentor individuals, how much pressure am I putting on them? And if there is some pressure that I am imparting upon them, is it appropriate? And that the answer to that is different depending on each individual and their capacity to handle external pressures. We kind of grew up on the east side with a bit of a chip on your shoulder. You didn't have anything, so you had to pretty much make your own breaks. And so when someone sort of laid it out for you, where if you don't screw it up, you're going to have a wonderful future ahead of you. It was pretty blunt. My mentors were very blunt in every way, where they sort of showed you the upside, and they also explained the downside. And as a kid with a bit of a chip on your shoulder, that you had nothing in life, nothing was given to you for free, you just rolled up your sleeves and said, okay, this is what I got to do. I'm going to put my hard hat on, and I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to sacrifice a few things. And you know what? It was disappointing at times. I saw friends at universities have a lot more fun than me. But I also felt like, because I was essentially being guided by remarkable people, that this was going to end okay. A lot better than where I came from, put it that way. And so the pressure was sort of self-absorbed. It got intense. There was, I have to tell you, here I am, I'm 58 years old, and I still have nightmares every once in a while of my university years and the pressure that I was under. And that was self-imposed. I mean, I think that I just didn't want to let anyone down, right? So I'm acutely aware as a mentor today to make sure that I calibrate my expectations with my mentees, just so that they know that I think they can do better. I think they can do more. Um, that perhaps they should reconsider what their potential is, but not put them in a way that will disappoint themselves if they don't achieve it. We had no downside. We came from nothing. So it was all upside by putting in the effort.
At Venture for Canada, we often hear from young people about the challenges they face in terms of imposter syndrome. When you were a young person, you were being mentored by these really senior figures in Vancouver. Did you ever struggle with imposter syndrome in any kind of way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's no question even to this day it pops up. And I've heard the same question, Scott, from a number of people I've mentored. And to be very clear, you know, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s that I speak with, a number of them will talk about imposter syndrome. In fact, I had a woman in her mid 30s talk about exactly that. She was being considered for quite a prominent role. In an upcoming organization, in an organization that was looking to fill a position, and she felt that, you know what, I'm not even sure I'm worthy of consideration. And when we walked through it, it was clear that she was. And again, it's just one of these cases where if you're humble, there are times when you can be overly humble and not recognize your full potential until someone spells it out for you, and you just got to work through that. You know, we often, when we go through life, we don't know what our full potential is or what our potential is in the eyes of others. And so when it starts to emerge, you have all sorts of self-doubt that maybe I don't deserve to be here. I don't have the right education. I'm not from the right family. I don't have the right group of friends. I don't have enough experience. These are all the things that sort of pop up in your brain. And yet, if you take a step back and you say, wow, in spite of all of that, I've succeeded in my role. I actually have the right connections. I've done the right things. And it's right that I'm being considered for this opportunity. And so we often have to walk full circle on um, why someone has the right to be considered. Maybe that's not the right word, but the right to be considered for an opportunity. And in mentorship, I spent a lot of time trying to understand a person's journey. Tell me where you started from, because you've heard from me, Scott, in this discussion. I pretty much started off from where I started off in life, and anyone who had mentored me would know. Okay, here's a kid from the east side of Vancouver, immigrant family, um, modest education. I mean, I've got a degree from UBC, but nothing handed to me, and and that helps frame their thinking and their conversations with me. Heck, I had one mentor teach me etiquette, and how to properly eat in front of a business crowd, which I needed. And so I do the same thing. I'll sit down with someone and walk through with them why they don't need to feel as an imposter. And often it starts back with, tell me how it all started. Tell me how you got to where you got to today. And by the time you figure out their life, you realize how much grit they've imposed on themselves and used to get to where they get to. And then you use those metaphors to get rid of the imposter syndrome to the extent that it exists in that moment of time. But I've gotten over hurdles, and then later on felt an imposter again. Had to remind myself why it's okay to be here and why I've earned the right to be considered. And so that's a journey I typically take with many people I mentor.
And that's a great segue to another topic that I'd love to zoom in, which is your experience acting as a mentor or serving as a mentor for different folks. John, can you describe a specific example of someone you've mentored in your life?
Well, I've mentored a lot of people. I felt a sense of obligation to mentor individuals where I think there's an opportunity to be of value. There's been quite a number of kids where I've taken great pride in where they've landed. One individual that comes to mind is a young man that graduated at a Sauder University, he reached out through an educational forum that he was part of, and I was a member of the advisory or mentorship team made available to these kids, and he was really struggling. He was struggling personally. He came from a broken family, um, somewhat ostracized by one parent, not really engaged with another, um, going through some identity issues as well, in terms of who he was, what he was, how he was, and then also contemplating, what do I do in my career? Because it's not clear what my life choices are professionally, even though my marks are remarkable. And part of um, the complexity of his life led him to never saying no. He always wanted to please people. And so he spent a lot of time saying yes and getting overextended on so many different things. And so as a mentor, I was actually mentoring him to do less rather than more. And when you do less, give more in terms of what you're doing, and actually see a tangible success, a meaningful move of the dial in that activity for those around you. The sense of insecurity had manifested itself where he needed to be sort of the center of attention, and we talked a little bit about that and how it could be misinterpreted when you become an adult in the workforce. Today, he's a remarkable young man in Chicago working for a very notable global organization and racing through it all. And years later, 5 years after graduation, he's still reaching out and calling me once a year to get an update and a bit of a tune-up. and I'm just I'm so proud of him because a lot of the challenges and identity issues that he was dealing with as a young man are now being dealt with proactively by him in a very healthy manner, and he's utilizing his intelligence in a way that's adding value because he's containing his level of activity to 3 or 4 things and making sure that when he gets involved in them, they're going to be finished and done in a manner that is going to change that world, and rather than overextend himself. And so he credits that to the successes he's enjoyed in his career. So I feel like I've had a lot of contributions to his journey, but there's been a number of stories like that for the women I've mentored. A lot of them coming out of university, going into jobs, getting appointed into higher positions, stumbling into the imposter syndrome and spending hours with them on why you're not an imposter. I had a young banking executive who was being considered for a role that was frankly populated by men historically in this one organization. She would have been the first female in that role. And it was both imposter and fear that was really gripping her from saying, yes, I'm taking on the role. So again, we walk through the imposter syndrome as we talked about, but then the fear was, don't judge an organization by its past experiences, look forward. And we spent a lot of time looking forward, and what you could see was a future where women could excel in leadership. And why not her being the first person to give it a go? So those would be 2 examples that come to mind.
Can you describe potentially like a specific conversation you've had with a mentee over the year that you think had a particularly like significant impact on that person? And why do you think that conversation was particularly impactful?
Yeah, again, I come back to Scott, the fellow I was just alluding to. We had a lot of heart to hearts, and part of being a successful mentor is being a little bit vulnerable. I explained to Scott some of the challenges that I had growing up. As much as they were very different from his, they were kind of similar. The emotional grief, the anxiety. Different but the same in terms of different forms of grief or anxiety, but the same levels of grief and anxiety. And so how do we deal with these things? And with this individual, we were talking a lot about how to deal with some of the challenges in his home life that were immensely distracting, causing all sorts of understandable anxiety. and how to perhaps reframe the relationship he had with one of his parents. And I could only do that having been a parent myself. It was interesting because it was one of the first times that I was able to mentor someone in terms of a family relationship, only because at the time I have my family, and it was living through my own experiences, and that context almost literally changed his life with respect to his relationship with his parents, and trying to contextualize that. Don't take it personal. Perhaps it's not you. It's something else that is far beyond you, and you just happen to be um, in the way of whatever this other individual is going through, and you turn out to be the foil, but it's not you. And let's walk through reasons why it's not, so that you can believe it's not. And that may give you a healthy start on everything else that you do, because you'll feel more grounded about yourself. And so that would be a conversation not too different from what I had with Mr. Doom, in terms of, here's who you are, here's what you can be, here's what's defined you all your life, and sometimes some of it's beyond your control. You don't have to own that. And so we walked through a lot of that, and that had a profound change in his life.
Zooming in and thinking about mentorship in general, John, if there's a young person who's listening to this interview right now and they're thinking of, they're reflecting, hey, I really want to work with a mentor in my life, but I don't know how to go and actually find a mentor. What are the qualities that you think that a mentee should look for in a prospective mentor?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, potential mentors are all around you. If you're active in the community, if you're in the workforce, if you're, as we heard earlier, in some form of activity. For me, it was soccer, but it could be dance, it could be ballet, it could be art, it could be a choir. There's always somebody somewhere in a position of leadership that could be a mentor. And I always start off with people when I talk about, if you're going to seek mentorship, find someone who you'd wish to emulate. You look at them and say, wow, I wish a part of me was a lot like them. So let's start off with that. But make sure that that person is also a very well respected person. Often people seek mentors who are successful, but not all successful people in whatever realm of the world that you're defining success are good people. So you have to ask yourself, what aspect of this individual do you wish to emulate or draw from, and challenge yourself. That will this be a productive, potentially productive relationship? So choose your mentor wisely. Also, when you look at a mentor, often you have to ask. A lot of people will sit there and say, how did XYZ get a mentor and I didn't? Well, often you have to ask. And that takes courage. You have to approach somebody to say, "Look, I've been working with you for a while, or we've known one another for a while, or I don't know you at all, and I'd like to reach out to talk a little bit about your journey as a successful professional, and make a connection." And two things will happen: either the mentor prospect will be flattered and say, "Yes, let's have a coffee and let's see if there's a connection here," or they'll say no, they're too busy, and there's just no downside, right? So part of it is identifying the right person, and then having the courage to make the approach, and know that you might be rejected, because successful people are busy, and so there's a likelihood that they will say no, but they'll politely say no, so that it won't be that hard to fall.
You've also worked with a wide range of different mentees over the years. And I'm sure there's some people you've mentored where the relationship, as you've described, has been incredibly impactful. But maybe there's other mentees you've worked with where you sometimes thought, oh, this person isn't setting things up to get the most value out of this relationship. So, what advice do you have for listeners, for young Canadians, on how to work effectively with a mentor?
Yeah, what an insightful question. Because when I consider um, where it failed, because not all mentorship relationships work. They always start out well intended, but it just might not work. So let's take a look at it from two lenses, one from the mentee and then one from the mentor. But let's start off with the mentee because that's the most likely listener. Um, First of all, it's possible that the mentee has chosen the wrong mentor. So that when you get together, you realize that it's apples and oranges. What this individual is looking for can't be provided by the other. So it just wasn't a good fit. Secondly, personality styles. If you have sort of the traditional alpha and non-alpha individuals, that could either work brilliantly or it could be a colossal disaster if you get a mix of personalities that again, although well-intended and even well-aligned, just don't work. And I have found that there are individuals that are quite eager to listen and enter into a conversation, and there's others who they show up but they're not sure what to do next. And I'm left with trying to fill in the gaps and empty spaces. And so, what can a mentee do? Where it typically fails, where the match is good, the personalities are a fit, and then it still fails, it's typically the mentee doesn't come prepared. So I feel very strongly when I sit down with someone I'm about to mentor to say, look, tell me what you want out of this mentorship. Like, what are you hoping to get out of this? So first of all, you're calibrating my expectations, and then I can calibrate yours in terms of what is reasonable. How much time do you want from me? How regularly do you think we should meet? Often it's either too frequent or too infrequent. Do you agree to do homework? And what I mean by that is you're going to send me an agenda of what you'd wish to speak to when we get together and why. And you're going to provide me areas on how I can help you. And that will be what we will talk about, plus other organic things that will arise that come from the conversation. And then there will be homework. There's going to be some takeaways. And the next time we meet, you're going to tell me what you did based on what we discussed. What was your follow through? What worked? What didn't work? And what should we look to as a conversation point for the next 2 or 3 months? And what I find is that the ones that work really successfully are the mentees that are willing to follow that program. You know, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it well, and so that you're going to get all of me by the time we come out of this, but you're going to be prepared. The kids who are not prepared, even the adults that I've mentored who are not prepared, you just feel like you're going through the motions. You feel like they can say, well, John's a mentor of mine. And that's sort of a tick in the box, but it's actually not a relationship. So where it's failed is where mentees have just not done the work and realized that they actually owe that to your mentor. And the same goes for mentors. Where mentors don't do the work, they're failing the mentee. And right beside me, I have a book of that I keep of a group of individuals that I'm mentoring currently, and I jot down what our conversations were, what the follow-up items are, what was expected of me, what was expected of them, and how that sets up our next conversation. Quite formal, actually, but I found that that serves everyone best when we do that. So, not being prepared going into the mentorship, just showing up is not good enough. You have to be showing up with a purpose, Scott, and that would be my recommendation.
Is there a regular cadence of meetings that you think works well in a mentor-mentee relationship?
Yeah, I'd say every 2 months is pretty good, 8 to 9 weeks. So that gives enough time to sort of digest the conversation and then do something about it, and then digest it again before you go into your next meeting. So I would really encourage, to the extent you can, like a lot of mentors are very busy, but to the extent you can, have a preset calendar every 2 months. I'd say 8 to 10 weeks. Have it on the calendar. It's in each other's calendars, so there's no reason to say I forgot to book it. And I think that's more than enough time to allow sufficient time to pass, but also time for for reflection and activity to occur based on the last discussion.
What do you think are some of the habits that can make a mentor particularly effective in helping a mentee?
A big one is humility. A lot of a lot of mentors naturally think they're there to fix things and solve for problems. But if you come in first of all being humble, you'll realize that you're not there to solve anyone's life. You're there to be a complement, an advisor, a supplement to their success. But you're not going to drive it. That you're not going to solve for it. You also, I think, bringing in some level of vulnerability is really important. As a mentor, you should be prepared to talk about your failings, your challenges, areas you wish you could have had a mulligan on or a redo. Those are all really important elements that a mentor can bring into the relationship. And I also think mentors need to be prepared. How do you prepare for this individual, and how have you recognized that they're different? I think that's a really important question as well. And then also understand the distinction between mentorship and sponsorship. As a mentor, you're there to be an advisor. You may sponsor, but sponsorship is typically done within an organization or within some community setting where an opportunity arises in the community, either within work or within any nonprofit organization. People say, hey, Scott's the perfect candidate for this. Let's put his name forward. And so mentoring is not meant to place people in specific roles. It's meant to advise them on how to get to those roles. And sometimes you sponsor, but really your job is to be a mentor. And that shouldn't be lost in the relationship.
There's a somewhat cheesy Tony Robbins quote, but I do think it is a good one, where it says the power of, or something along the lines that someone's impact is highly linked to the power of their questions. And I think that relates to mentors. What do you think are some of the most powerful, the most impactful questions that a mentor can ask a mentee?
Well, tell me about you. What do I need to know about you? How can I help you? How did it go? What did you learn from what you did? What did you learn from what you didn't do? Is this still working? Is this still working for you? What can I do as a mentor to help you more than I currently am? Can I provide you some advice? It's not working for me as a mentor. Can I guide you on how I think this could be better? Is that all you got? Don't you think you can do more? And what's the barrier for you to do more? Like, what are your challenges? What's the impediment for you to getting to a higher level? Are you the best that you can be? If so, why? If not, tell me why not. Those are some of the key questions that will pop up in the course of our conversations, and they're not metaphorical. They're actually questions where any one of those questions can go on for an hour, but they're very important questions.
Someone once told me the phrase high possibility environments, that one of the most important things that one can gain access to in life are these environments where the possibility of what you can potentially accomplish in your life increases. How do you think mentors can help facilitate these kind of high possibility environments for mentees?
Well, really interesting question. Never been asked that before, and I think it's a really important question on reflection. And for the listeners, this conversation is completely organic, so I didn't see that one coming. So, Scott, I'd say, first of all, as a mentor, once you've seen or identified the potential in the mentee, I think it's imperative that you start to explore the possibilities. Given where you are now, where do you see yourself being in a year from now? That seems a bit modest. How do we get a bit more from here? Where do you see yourself 3 years from now? What do we need to put in place to get you there? What are the risks that you're going to face? Just think about the risks that you think you're going to come up against, and do you have it in you to take them on? What's the downside of risking and failing once you've identified the possibility? Like, if there's no downside, because the downside is status quo, then who cares? Let's go for it. How do you go for it? So once we've identified the possibilities and the ambition and the aspiration, well, that's not enough. You kind of need a plan. And so where are gaps in your plan? And so we need to explore those a bit further, because they might push out the timeline a little bit, or frankly, they might accelerate it. There's nothing to lose. Let's go for it. So that would be how I would answer that question, and certainly things that I've discussed with a number of different people, and often, with mentor relationships, I'm mentoring people between, 18 and 40. And in that age range, so many opportunities and possibilities are available to the people I'm talking with, and so this is an eventuality. We'll eventually get to a place where someone says, "I'm at a fork in the road. I see this really cool opportunity. I can do status quo, which might lead me to a cool place in 5 years' time, or this might accelerate my path, but it's a very different journey than what I'm taking on now." And so we just roll up our sleeves and get at it. How do we take this one on, and what should you think about? What are your downside risks? But as a mentor, I think it's really important to explore the possibilities, but also the realities that go with that conversation, and then you try to deal with them.
How did mentors help you see more possibility in your life?
Well, first of all, through self-improvement, when you get a bit more established in your career, it's often the things you're not doing versus the things that you are doing that seem to impede you from moving forward. And so what I find is by getting mentored by people who are far more experienced than me, identifying things I'm not doing, either because I'm doing it incorrectly or it's just not on my radar, in terms of an activity, or in terms of how I'm conducting myself in a relationship environment. By filling in those gaps, they make you more whole, make you a more complete person that people can have more confidence in, and then with that feel that they can hand over a certain responsibility to you at that stage in your life. So it could be being a board chair, being a committee chair, taking on a project, being a lead director in a startup company, leading a deal. These are all things that filling the gaps allow you to do with more confidence. So that's what I'm finding right now at this stage of my life. But that could be said for anybody at any stage of their lives. The more complete you are as a person, the better qualified you will be for that next challenge.
Mentorship is something we talk a lot about at Venture for Canada, and that we recommend our program participants look into, which is one of the reasons why we focused on this theme in this episode. Another often less known concept is that of a personal advisory board, and how a personal advisory board can play a huge role in enhancing one's career as impact. John, can you describe at a high level what is a personal advisory board?
Yeah, very high level. I'm not part of one. I should just preface that, but I know a number of people who are. So a personal advisory board, from my perspective and my experience, is a group of peers that typically come together. And if it's not peers, it's, the gap in experience is not very great between the person who is seeking an advisory board and those who are part of it. And they meet fairly regularly to talk about thematic challenges that occur, and often on an organic basis. So it's a group of about 4 or 5 people, typically of professionals, or it could be community leaders, that get together fairly regularly and talk about the challenges they're facing, either in their careers, or more typically, from what I'm seeing, people are gathering in CEO forums, for example. And so a group of young CEOs will be together, and they'll just sort of ham it out in terms of some of the challenges that they're facing. So if you're a young CEO in a startup company, a personal advisory board might be one of two things. One, 4 or 5 mentors who don't have time to be your mentor on a regular basis, but are willing to come together as a group over dinner and talk about some of the community challenges that they're seeing within their areas of expertise. Or you're a young CEO, young CFO, and you collect another grouping of CFOs in your community that you know of and say, look, you're a CFO, I'm a CFO, or you're a CEO and I'm a CEO. Why don't we get together regularly and talk about some of the challenges that we're seeing in our respective careers? And I see a lot of women doing this with advisory boards, in particular, where some of the unique challenges that women may be going through, especially in early stage companies, where some of the environments can be quite toxic, just because of fraternity-like behaviors. Thankfully, that's drifting away relative to where it was, 10 years ago. But I see personal advisory boards working particularly well for women, but that should be restricted to gender. I think it's more circumstantial.
Are there any books, podcasts, interviews, resources that you recommend listeners check out to learn more about mentorship?
Yours, Scott. There's only one source of the truth, and, and that's yours. So outside of this forum, you know what? I think it's an exploration. I can't tell you how much I've read. I have read hundreds, if not thousands, of books on personal development, professional development, organizational behavior, EQ, IQ. The most successful leaders or aspiring leaders are the curious ones, the people who have to satiate their level of curiosity, who understand that they're not perfect, and so are willing to read everything and anything that would make them feel a lot better. Again, no one can see it on a podcast, but over my shoulder, I have a number of books that I just, have referenced over my career, and they were good for me, but they weren't necessarily good for others. And frankly, any book that I would be referencing today is probably out of date relative to the modern organization today. There's so much that we're dealing with that you have to ensure that what you're reading remains relevant. And so I would say, rather than any one source of truth when it comes to personal or professional development, seek multiple points of truth, because different perspectives will provide you that kernel of thought that will create great leaps and bounds in your development.
At Venture for Canada, we are big fans of reading and big fans of books, and kind of zooming out a little bit away from the topic of mentorship, but more to you kind of in general, John. When you think of all the books you've read and the impact that they've had on you, what are the books that have had the most lasting impact on you, and what has that impact been?
Well, there's only there's so many books. I'm just looking up on my bookshelf. There's one book more than anything else, and that's A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. When you take a look at succeeding beyond the odds, and the personal sacrifice that one person has made, and he's not perfect. He's, as much as Mandela was essentially designed to be some angelic figure, he was an angry man, and for good reason, for many years, and sometimes did things he, without question, would have regretted. But that being said, he had a bold and correct purpose. He was willing to take it on and put it on his shoulders at all costs. And then he evolved into this remarkable statesman that all of us wanted to emulate. It just shows you that you can come from, a very gritty, against the odds background to becoming one of the most important people on earth while you remained alive, and also now in death, as long as people will remember him. That left quite an impact on me. I just read it, and I just realized what the sacrifices to leadership were if you really want to be a different leader. And I don't want to do any form of self-aggrandizement and tell myself that I was better than others, but I do feel that when it came to leadership, I would hope that people who worked with me would say that I was a very strong leader strategically, but an empathetic leader on par with anyone. And I think that book, more than anything else, it had a real impact on me. And so that would be the book, not obviously a business book, but they don't all have to be business books. They just have to be books that allow and force self-reflection.
I agree.
What's your? I was just going to ask you, Scott. What book had an impact on you?
Yeah, I often say that some of the books that I've learned most from in terms of like a business capacity have been books that are not business books as well. I'm definitely a big fan of biography. And I think some of the books that have had the biggest impact on me would be I'm a huge fan of Robert Caro,
Yeah.
who is a biographer, and his biography on Robert Moses is one of my favorite books. But I also love his LBJ biography series in general. And so that's I'd say one series of books or an author that has definitely been particularly kind of resonant. I would say if there was another book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl is definitely a book that has had a significant impact on me. And there are so many others. I often, when asked this question, I will revert to the most recent book that I read. But I would say my favorite, I actually have a spreadsheets where I like list every book I've ever read, and then I rate my top books for the year. So I have like a list of all my best books of all time, but starting in 2020. So it was a more recent list. But I would say my favorite book of this year so far is probably Chip Wars by Chris Miller. That's about the global semiconductor industry. Not anything really to do with personal development, but a great book if you want to learn more about global semiconductors.
Well, I've read a book called Niccolo's Smile, and this is a book on Machiavelli, of all things. And I thought, well, I know very little about Machiavelli, but we always hear about Machiavellian intent. And it's a remarkable book because it explains through the eyes of the author, whose name escapes me at this moment, where Machiavellian was really anything but how we've framed him today in modern times. He was just an astute politician and observer of political activity and behaviors, and a middle manager, effectively. So when you think about how he has resonated to these days and how his name is invoked, it's remarkable that this essential middle manager of the Italian political class became, memorable in time, and in infinitum, he'll be quoted as Machiavellian. Something will be Machiavellian, and yet he was anything but. It was quite an eye-opening book, and it was really, really interesting to see how, from an organizational perspective, he was quite strategic. The other book that I read was Da Vinci, and just a remarkable book on how someone could follow his passions and seemingly succeed. And he had multiple passions, and he also had at the time a hidden secret, and that was his homosexuality. And just to see how he thrived at a time where certain things were deemed taboo. He was an artist, but he saw himself more as an engineer. This upstart called Michelangelo was showing up. And so there was all sorts of things that were happening in his life. And it was just a remarkable book on perseverance and following one's passions. And that's another life worth reading about. And no doubt many people have read about Churchill, and there's a number of biographies on Churchill, but I think the thing that comes out is his flaws. He was not a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination, but he was the perfect person for the time, in a moment of time. And it could show you how leadership can be fleeting as well. And so again, your curiosities will take you all over the place. And I love biographies. Well-written biographies are remarkable teachers of behaviors and things to emulate or not to emulate. So, yeah.
I completely agree. I do like some business books, but I often find I learn more from just reading the personal stories of different people.
Oh, for sure.
The resilience, just of what's like to your point about Mandela. Also, I read a biography last year on Gandhi, and just the extent of just constant heartbreak and personal challenges, and also to realize that even similar to Mandela, like Gandhi is now a largely revered figure, although interestingly more revered outside of India today than within India. In India, he's become actually kind of a controversial figure. But these people make mistakes, and even at I also read a biography on Churchill, and I've mentioned this on another podcast episode we've done at BFC, but it's interesting where there's all the quotes like "I will fight in the beaches" and how he's this person of like and he was extremely resilient, but also he's somebody who had he black dog depression, and he's somebody who had huge personal struggles like in
He was
his
an
life. But
alcohol. He was an alcoholic. He had multiple personalities. He had massive failings and failures, and yet he's revered. And
yeah,
revered for good reason. Like I said, there was a moment in time where the world needed him, and he rose to the challenge at the right time. And it's not to not essentially just before the war ended, he was effectively voted out of Parliament, if you'll recall.
yeah.
So here he was, a hero, and minutes later, a bum. So, but history's been kind to him, and for good reason. But you do learn reading about Churchill, because for all his strengths, and there were many, there were some flaws that were ultimately catastrophic. And so I think those are things we need to learn.
Oh, and how I think one of the appreciation from biography is that no one is perfect, and that all figures, including people who are sometimes held up as perfect, and no one is perfect, and that everyone has their failings. Because I think to an earlier point in this conversation about mentorship and the pressure sometimes young people can put themselves under to be perfect, I think it's sometimes helpful to read the biographies of these figures who created huge impact, to be like, you can still create a huge impact in your life, but there's not an expectation that you have to be perfect at everything.
Well, Scott, that point of perfect is actually an interesting one for the individuals who are listening, who are 18-ish. Because of grade inflation, you're pretty much been perfect all through your high school years. And when I talk about grade inflation, the entrance levels to get into universities now are essentially 90 something percent and higher. When I was graduating, not to be an old fogey, but it was 72% right across Canada, no matter where. And the Ivies, if you can afford to get in, you were taken. And today, regardless of universities, the marks of the entrance marks are somewhere north of 80, and for the ones that rank highly for various reasons, 90% and more. So high schools have inflated their grades because of various rankings and the like that exist. No school would like to be seen as the worst school. So all these grades have been inflated. The way marking has changed correctly says, look, if you understand the process of learning more than the outcome, you will get a near perfect mark. So you go into university and you're surrounded by people who have had perfect all their lives. And for the first time you're faced with a university professor who could care less whether you think you're perfect or have been called perfect. You're going to have your first existential crisis when you get your first 70% on your exam, and you've never had one of those before in your life, or maybe a 60, or in my case, a 50. And so you sit back and say, how do I deal with that? Well, the workplace is no different. Once you get through university and you feel like, okay, I've got that behind me, it's the workplace. You're always constantly faced with failure. And it's one of the beautiful reasons why in many startup companies, and I'm involved in about 30 companies, failure is, you don't want to fail, but if you do fail, you kind of embrace it and say, okay, what the heck happened? How do we not repeat this? Because if we do, we'll be out of money. What do we learn from this? How does this make us stronger? And what I've actually seen is traditional corporations are now sort of embracing failure, saying, okay, we don't want to fail. Point number one, let's try not to fail. But if we do, let's go back and do a full review of what happened and how does this make us stronger, so we're not embarrassed by it, that we can, celebrate it to the extent that we can. And when I'm mentoring people, I'll go through numerous examples of failings in people, just much like we just did, Scott, of famous people, but also of myself and other people that I might say, okay, tell me someone you know in the community, like someone you really revere. I might know them. And then we'll talk about them, and we'll talk professionally about their strengths and weaknesses. And by the time it's done, they realize, yeah, people aren't perfect, and the pressure comes off a little bit that, you should always strive for perfection, but if you don't attain it, that should be expected, right?
Yeah, it's about the journey, not the outcome. And
Yeah.
we do a lot of trying to educate young people about perfectionism, and that the antidote to perfectionism is not doing anything, but how to cultivate that healthy striving, recognizing the end goal of perfection is unattainable, but at the same time, I think we all want to strive to be the best version of ourselves. And similar to like that balance you talked about at the beginning of that interview, it's like how to encourage mentees to strive to be better, but also then to realize, okay, when's the line of striving to be better becoming unhealthy?
Yeah, that's really important, and I have had those conversations. It's funny, the conversations I've had is on both ends of the spectrum, where you're not trying hard enough, so the world's not going to toss you a freebie, and then there's the other side of it is, man, you're going too hard. It's not healthy, and why are you doing this? Tell me what you hope to gain out of this, because I don't see anything healthy coming out of this, and it could breed narcissistic behaviors if it goes on too long. So those are all important conversations that certainly I've had at both ends of the spectrum.
John, it's been a true pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Scott, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for reaching out, and I hope this has been of value to anyone listening. So thank you again.
It definitely has. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.